Introduction to this autumnal afternoon session, making new plants. We had a super sunny day here yesterday in Ayrshire, but I think it's safe to say that autumn has well and truly arrived today, bringing with it a much damper afternoon, but we have enjoyed the fabulous changing of leaf colour over the past few weeks, and it's just been lovely seeing the foliage in its hues of reds and oranges that really do brighten up our much more noticeably shorter days. So, of course, the things we probably associate most with autumn is the chore of collecting fallen leaves. But as the leaves fall and expose the structure of the shrubs, less familiar berries are exposed for us to visually enjoy. And of course, the birds will be stocking up for their winter ahead. The fallen leaves do need tidying up, which is a bit of a chore. But there's another wee job that's a bit more interesting that we can be doing just now, and that is the divisioning of some types of plants that can then either be replanted straight away or overwintered in small pots ready to be planted next spring, or perhaps used in a plant sale or given as gifts to other gardeners. So, what is divisioning? It is a propagation method where we are dividing up the plant. A mature or mother plant is split into two or more pieces, each with its own roots and shoots to create an individual self-sufficient new plant. It's not only a simple method, but an important gardening job to be doing because dividing plants every few years prevents overcrowding, whether that's in the border or in containers. Overcrowding can lead to the plants competing for space, lights, and nutrients, resulting in fewer flowers being produced. So by dividing them up, it helps the plants to maintain their health and vigour, and it's a relatively cheap way of getting more plants for your garden. The plants suitable for autumn divisioning are perennials, which come in all sizes and shapes and colour of flowers and foliage. Perennials are long-lived plants, but unlike trees and woody shrubs, they don't have a permanent above-ground woody structure. And by that, I mean there's no woody stems that you can hang your fairy lights on at Christmas time. Most perennial plants, leaves and foliage die down temporarily into the ground every late autumn. They stay in that dormant state through the winter months, and then by magic, it's quite incredible how they resurrect themselves the following springtime. Their root systems are more rhizome or tuber-like compared to the woody network of roots that shrubs and trees have. And most perennial plants are herbaceous perennials, such as the Crocosmia shown here down the bottom left of the slide, which means that all of their top foliage dies off during the winter time, but their underground root system stay very much alive. And the perennials, such as the Libertia here to the right-hand side of the screen, they keep their foliage all year round. So that green clump will remain visible all year round, but it's not actively growing. And these plants, these types are known as evergreen perennials. So perennial plants are most easily recognised as the ones that give all those lovely flowers during our summer months. And you will probably recognise some of them here. We've got Ajuga, Alstroemeria, Berginia, Heuchera. And then, of course, there's other popular garden plants such as your Epimedium, Hellebores, which is your Christmas rose, geraniums and hostas, along with herbs such as mint and chives. They can all be divided in the autumn time. So why do we divide during the autumn months? Because in theory, plants can be divided at almost any time of the year, providing they are kept well watered afterwards. But as a guide, division proves more successful when the plants are not in full active growth, and that is generally the time following their flowering period. So that's why we talk mainly about divisioning our perennial plants in autumn, because most perennials are summer flowering. Summer flowering from early through to late summer, therefore entering their inactive period in autumn time. Also, the cooler weather and almost guaranteed rainfall in autumn provide great conditions for newly divided plants to settle and re-establish their root systems before their winter dormant period. And of course, it helps reduce stress because dividing plants after they're finished flowering helps reduce stress on the plant, allowing them to concentrate putting their energy into new root growth instead of having to make flowers or new foliage. As I said, spring divisioning of plants can take place, but this tends to be only if the soil conditions were too wet to be doing the work with the plants in the previous autumn time. And there are some tender perennials such as diorama, which is also known as angel's fishing rods, which are slower to establish their more fragile root systems, and they are best divided in the springtime when the weather should not have such a detrimental impact on their usually much slower development period anyway. So as I've said, most perennial plants flower mid to late summer and therefore are divided in autumn. So the spring to early flowering summer perennials, such as your dicentra, euphorbia, and iris, can be divided in summer immediately after they are finished flowering, as this is the time that these plants will be putting their energies into root development. But do be really aware that these newly divided plants require particular attention to ensure their root systems don't dry out during summer's warmer and drier period. So, I've been dividing up a few plants in my garden over the past couple of weeks, and I've taken a few photos to show the process. Hostas are popular garden plants and are a really easy plant to divide as your first trial one if you fancy having your first go at divisioning. Picture one shows a healthy clump of the mature plant. And the next photo shows the clump being lifted entirely out of its large trough it was growing in and being set onto a plastic sheeting. And this was just to save on some mess because I was working on top of gravel. Next, I use a spade to chop the root ball into 4 pieces. The first piece was put back into the trough that it came out of. The next 2 were planted in my garden border further along in the garden. And the 4th clump, I teased the roots apart with my hands, so further dividing the clump into several small pieces. Each individual piece was then potted up into a small pot, like this 9 centimetre pot shown here in picture number 6. And you can see that in the you can see in the 7th picture, you can see that the 4th clump that we were working with here has generated 5 new plants. Hostas develop strong new root systems quickly, so I'd expect to have these all with healthy root systems in around 2 months' time, really ready to be planted out come early spring. And I really shouldn't show this, but anyway, this was a neglected mint plant that had fallen over. It was in a pot and fallen over. I'd forgotten all about it. It was out the back of the polytunnel, and you can see that the mint shoots and leaves. This is me holding the pot up right now, so you can see that the shoots and leaves were growing. They're now growing horizontal the way I'm holding it, but because the pot was lying on its side, they'd grown up the way towards the daylight. So I thought, right, best do something with this poor wee plant. So picture 2 and 3 show the roots were pot bound, and the pictures also show the spreading nature of the mint's roots. And it's got lots of healthy white roots and signs of new shoots developing also. This kind of evidences how when you plant mint in the garden, it can take over. So it's good advice to always plant a mint in a big container so that you can control its growth and spreading habit. So picture 4, yeah, I didn't put on my gloves, you put on your gloves, and tease or tear the roots apart until you've several individual pieces with both roots and shoots together, as shown here in picture 5. And I also cut off the older, like the older pieces of the stem from the mint plant that were attached to the root pieces, just to keep it nice and simple and easy to manage. And that older woody stem was not much use to me. So picture 6, you can see me getting ready to pot the wee plants up into their new pots. Just general purpose compost and 9 centimetres pots is what I've used. And then this is me having popped one of the pieces into the small pot, and I'm ensuring that the neck of the plant, where the roots and the stems meet, um, that's the height that the compost comes up to, so that the roots are fully covered, but none of the shoots are covered with compost. And then labelled the individual pots so as to remember what's what over the coming winter months. I gave them a good soaking to settle the roots into the compost, and these plants just sit quietly over the winter months with their roots developing inside the wee pots, quite the thing. And then come spring, the shoots will quickly develop, and you'll have huge selection of mint plants to share with others. Now, I did say that I cut the woody parts of the mint stems off, the end pieces. So I did actually, I kept them, and I thought I'm going to snip the woody cuttings to around 8 centimetres in length. And I took off the bottom sets of leaves and nipped out the top growth and any wee flowers that were maybe at the top of the stem, leaving around 3 to 4 sets of leaves on each stem, as you can see here in the third picture along. I then popped them into a jar of water, and I sat them on a windowsill out of direct sunlight. And this was just at the end of last week I took this photograph. This was well within 2 weeks. We can see little white thread-like roots forming. So once they've got lots more of these wee thread-like roots, I'll pot them up as well into some general purpose compost, and I'll have even more mint plants for next summer. So I guess that's the summer mojitos sorted. So another herb that can be divided just now are chives, as they naturally die down over the winter months. So now is a good time to divide up any congested planters or clumps growing in soil to ensure a strong and healthy supply next year. This pot's roots weren't too difficult to tear apart at all, not like the mint plant. I split the chive root ball into 7 small clumps of roots and potted each one into its own wee pot with general purpose compost. And as I said before, the plant will be heading towards its dormancy period in the next few weeks. So I cut the chives green stalks down to around 3 centimetres, which helps divert the plant's energy into root development, which will help ensure a strong, sturdy spurt of growth come springtime. Again, labels were popped in. Believe me, in the middle of winter, when you're trying to identify fairly barren plots of compost, the labels are a surefire winner. And again, I gave them a good watering in to settle the compost. I will watch out for watering over the coming months, but as I've said, the plant's going into its dormant period, so I need to be careful not to overwater and cause the plant's roots to rot. And they might do this because they're no longer actively taking up any real amounts of water until the springtime, so we want to ensure we don't overwater them and have them waterlogged. So, next plant I'm going to talk about is the Begonia, also known as elephant's ears. It's an evergreen perennial, which means its large, heavily veined, kind of crinkly edged leaves are evergreen and visible all year round, but it doesn't have that woody structure like a shrub. I love it, and I grow it wherever there's a wee gap in my garden needing a filler, because it's a really good clumping plant. It doesn't spread and take over, and it seems to like almost any conditions, or at least so in my garden. I also use leaves a lot in leaf crafting work. So maybe keep your eye out for one in a garden centre if you like local too. So depending on the type of garden soil that plants are growing in, they can sometimes be pulled apart quite easily by hand without the use of a spade. So here we have a clump of Virginia. The leaves were separated out by hand to show two smaller clumps of leaves. And as the soil was dampish and nice and frable, not compacted or that cloggy clayish way, I was able to gently pull the two shoots out of the soil quite easily. And the third image shows one thick root joining the two wee clumps together. So each hand is holding a wee clump, and then along the bottom of each clump there's a one root holding the two of them together. So Begonia have rhizomatous roots, which are thick, fleshy, underground stems that they do spread, but not invasively. And they serve both as an energy storage facility and for propagation purposes. As I said, they do grow in a slight spreading fashion, but it's much more clump-like, and they send up new shoots as the root develops and spreads about a little bit. And because the rhizome root is thick and solid, and this particular one wasn't terribly fat, I was actually able to snap it with my hands. But you would ordinarily just cut it by using secateurs. I snapped it, trying to keep a piece of the thick root with some of the fibrous wee thread-like roots round about it. Although it's not totally necessary to have those wee thready roots attached, because the rhizome itself will make more thread-like roots. So you can see that each piece of root now had its own wee clump of leaves attached. And the middle image shows a few Virginia pieces, some general purpose compost, and I've gone with 10 centimetre pots here. Again, you don't want to have pots that are too big. We want to encourage the new divided piece of root to make strong growth, and it's easier for the roots to do that if they're confined in a smaller space, as it will make its fibrous roots, and these fibrous roots spread and develop far more quickly as they try to find moisture, which is less available to them in a smaller pot. The finished planting height of the new plant that's being potted needs to end up, as I've said before, having its neck, that joint between the root and the shoot, it needs to be no higher than where the finished level of compost is going to be. So we can see a little indentation, a little line visible just below the rim of the pot. You can see this in the third image. So what I've done is I've put a little compost into the base of the pot, I've positioned the plant. If the neck of the plant sits lower than the indented line, I would remove it and add a little more compost to increase the level. And if the wee plant's neck is above the indented line, I would take out some of the compost bed and then reposition the plant. Again, just trying to keep the level of the neck of the plant in line with that little indented mark on the pot. I then filled the rest of the pot. I filled in and around the neck and the roots of the Virginia piece with compost, up to the neck as I showed you. And then the second image here shows a second piece, but the rhizome was far too big to fit inside this little pot. So I took my secateurs and I just cut it, the rhizome, to reduce it in size so it would fit inside this pot. And then the last image shows the large Virginia leaves being cut in half. And the reason we do that is we cut the large leaves of newly potted young plants. We cut them down in size, and I'm cutting these ones in half to reduce water loss and stress on the young plant. By reducing the leaf surface area, you lower the rate of evaporation of water from the leaves through its tiny pores. So in the case with this large leaf Virginia, the root system can absorb enough water to look after those large leaves. So if you cut them in half, then it doesn't have to take up so much water to keep those leaves nice and happy. So these new plants are now being kept in a sheltered spot, and there will definitely be enough rain will fall that they won't be needing hand watered. But I'll make sure if we do get a dry spell that they don't dry out. And I would expect these new plants to have developed a sturdy root system that they can be planted out in a border or container by early spring, or possibly much sooner if the weather stays reasonably nice. So just to show another root system that perennial plants can have, this is an astilbe being lifted by a spade out of a raised bed that it was growing in. And then the second image here, you can see it's been split in half. We've used the spade to cut right down through the middle of the clump that we lifted out. And you can see the sort of condensed, chunky, woody root that's now visible. And that's it being split completely in half by the spade. So the first half of the plant, the first chunk that was separated was planted back into the hole that it came out of, and the second piece was moved along and planted in the garden border opposite the raised bed. And this is a geranium. This clump of geranium has been slowly spreading too far. So I had a wee look in at its growth. When I pulled back the foliage, I could see several shoots of growth happily growing away from the mother clump of the plant. And this was growing again in a raised bed, lovely fertile loamy soil. So it was slightly damp. So I just dug around with my fingers and quite literally dug out the shoot along with its roots and detached it from the mother plant. And there were several more pieces like that. And again, they're all potted up now also. So that's another 5 or 6 geranium plants for next year. This is an ajuga plant. And it's growing in a little pot here. And it's just, I mean, this poor wee thing has been needing divided for a while. You can tell by the moss it's growing over the compost. So I've got this. This is actually a tool for digging perennial long rooted tap roots, long perennial roots, perennial weed roots, I should say, out of your lawn. So it's got a nice serrated edge here. It's got a nice wee pointed bit. And I just thought this could be the very tool for getting this out of this pot. So I'm just going to, oh, can you hear that?
Yes.
It's like cutting. It's lovely. Very satisfying noise. And I'm just going to kind of like, yep, can you see that coming out?
Yep.
All these lovely white roots around here. And I'm actually just going to tear this apart because there's 2 wee plants here. Here's one here, and here's a tiny wee plant here. I'm just going to take some of that compost off. Yep, sit them there, move this to the side. I've got myself some general purpose compost here, straight out of its compost bag. So I'm going to break up the lumpy bits just to make it more inviting for these wee fibrous roots to get developing quite happily. So 2 wee ones. So small pot, it's quite a shallow pot. It's 9 centimetres in diameter, but it's probably only about 6 centimetres in depth. We drop compost in the bottom. And as before, when I talked about it, I'm going to place that in. And I want to make sure that the neck of the plant is kind of in line with this indented line. So if you can see that okay, Jenny, yep?
Yes.
Okay. And then I'm just going to, from the compost, in and around it. Keeping this there, I'm going to snip that wee stem off there because it's not, I don't want it there. It's not doing my plant much good. And that's that wee one potted up. Second one, it's got a much chunkier root system here. So I've got again 9 centimetre pot, proper size, proper depth. So some compost in, tapping it to settle the compost at the bottom. Same idea, placing it so that the neck is in line with this. It's called a watering line in these pots. The idea is that you fill the compost up to that watering line, and then when you come to water, you've got space to actually water into, and the amount of water that will gather in that void, that space between the compost and the rim of the pot, should be enough water for that amount of compost that sits down that length. So there we have it. 2 wee plants potted up, ready to rock and roll. I'll cut off these wee bits and bobs that aren't doing anything else. But I've probably got about another 3 or 4 plants in that pot that I can pot up as well. Although this looks very obvious what it is at the moment, I'm still going to label them. Ajuga division in today's date. Because as I say, once all these plants get outside, if they start to die back a little bit above ground, then I still know that the root inside that is my Ajuga plant, and it will be developing over the winter months, and I know what to expect come next springtime. And what I also want to show you is my chive plant and my mint that I potted up. So these were the mints, and I cut the stems off, if you remember. So that's the remains of the woody stems. And this is all the new mint shoots already starting to spout up out of the roots. Now, I don't think we don't have much of a root system developing, but you can maybe see some quite fibrous roots starting to develop. Yep. So, yeah, that wee plant's doing quite happily, so it is, enjoying life. And then this is one of the chives. Again, it's actually putting on fresh growth. That shows how mild it's been, actually. Same thing. Oops, there we go. Wow. It's really happy. It's putting on loads of happy root development here. So again, the chives are doing great. So it just goes to show, you know, like dividing up plants does help their general health and vigour. If that wouldn't be doing that if I'd left it where it was, that's for sure. And this chive plant, so did I have about 6 or 7 chive plants altogether? So gosh, it's amazing how they've already started to grow and develop. So there we go.